What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Gridiron podcast. And we want to give you guys a huge shout out for pulling up to the live stream this past weekend where Mike and I did some play by plays. If you guys couldn't tell, I kind of lost my voice due to it. Let's just say the games were pretty crazy. But also, we have noticed the likes, comments, and the engagements, but we see that most of you guys aren't subscribed. So if you guys can take 5 seconds and go subscribe right now, that would be greatly appreciated. That way we can keep pumping out more content and potentially grow our content even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Your guys' feedback is definitely taken into consideration whenever we do episodes and pumping out content because we want to see what you guys want to see. So, all that stuff definitely helps. But with that being said, Nick and I did do a watch party. Rams versus the Chicago Bears. This was a crazy game. Crazy, crazy game. I think that I thought the Bears were going to win this game again with some magical miracle with Caleb Williams at the last play of the game, fourth quarter, 4th and 14, which turned into a 40 or 45-yard pass because he was getting pressured, finds Cole Kmet in the back of the end zone to tie the game again. I thought the magic was coming again, Nick.
Yeah, I did too, especially when that happened and just seeing our reactions back. It was definitely a crazy play. Like you said, it was fourth down. You had to convert here. It was fourth and goal at the 10-yard line, and Caleb Williams drops back and is pressured all the way back to the 40-yard line. Now, I said during the live stream it looked like a push off, but after looking at reviews, it doesn't fully look like a push off. It just looks like he got really good positioning on Durant, and it was just a really good play out of Caleb Williams and Cole Kmet. But I do want to touch on the stagnant Rams offense. How they were very stagnant pretty much from the first drive. After the first drive, they scored a touchdown. And then they were stagnant up until probably the middle of the third quarter, end of the third quarter.
Yeah, I think, as you said, it was a great opening drive. They went down and scored 7, and I thought that would set the tone. But I think it was the next 4 times, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they went 3 and out and ended up punting the football, and that allowed Chicago to climb back in the game. They answered with 7 of a drive of themselves, and I thought that would definitely be crucial. The cold weather, of course, being a critical factor in this game. Matthew Stafford looked so off. I think he was 24 of 48 he finished with or something like that. It was like 50% completion rate. Just balls that were not even close. But it'd be one thing, like, we could talk about the Bears and their receivers dropping footballs. But for the Rams, it was Matthew Stafford, throwing behind receivers, throwing too far, not even just close. And I was very surprised by that because I thought after the first drive, the Rams would come out and continuously score, but that was just not the case.
And they weren't getting the run game involved either. I remember both
Yeah.
of us continuously saying, run the football, run the football. And when they would run it, Kyron Williams was getting good yardage. Blake Corum was getting good yardage. And then towards the end, obviously, Kyron Williams scores the go ahead touchdown. And in overtime, they seal it after that. But I also, on the flip side, want to talk about, you mentioned the Bears receivers dropping passes. You had a lot of them from Colston Loveland. You had a lot of them from Roma Dunze. You had a couple from DJ Moore as well. I think in total it was about maybe 17 total drops by the Bears offense. And obviously we'll get into the interceptions later after we talk about this, but do you think the cold weather really played a factor in it? Obviously, it was snowing and the cold weather, obviously, but some of these dropped passes, they had to reach out a little bit further than they actually needed to. And it seemed like Caleb Williams was off. Obviously, the 3 interceptions that he threw plays a factor into that. But at the same time, you have receivers dropping passes, and then Colston Loveland goes down with an injury in the fourth quarter as well. Do you think that the cold truly played like a main factor into them dropping it, or do you think it was bad throws by Caleb Williams to factor into that?
Think it was a combination of a lot of things, but I do think mainly, I don't think the cold weather played a part like we think it did for the Chicago Bears because they were in this cold practicing all week. So realistically, the one drop that was critical, first drive, where Caleb throws that pick, Roma Dunze tries to bring the ball in with his hands into his chest, could not do it, goes right through his hands. That would have been a touchdown. Colston Loveland throws by Caleb were definitely off the mark. In the fourth quarter, I think it was the last drive as well. There was just a one-on-one DJ Moore. He just threw it way over his head too fast. It was just like, what was that? Part of it was Caleb Williams. Now, Colston Loveland did have some critical drops. There were just bad drops by him. It was just these plays that you expect from your big time playmakers. Like Loveland had a great game against the Packers, and you expect him to do the same, but he did not. He dropped the ball multiple times, which costed you. Roma Dunze, I know he's coming off a injury, but even still, I don't think a
Right.
foot injury impacts the way he was going for that catch. So I think it was a combination of Caleb Williams and just the receivers not being able to make plays when you expect them to. But I do want to talk about, because you mentioned it with the interceptions, the DJ Moore. People are calling him out, not saying it's Caleb's fault. Caleb held back. Even in the interview, I did watch it. Someone asked him about it, and he did say there was a miscommunication. That's what he said to cover it up. He's not going to throw his receiver under the bus. I do want to talk about that because in the route, they did the same play against the 49ers. And for this time, though, I think DJ Moore didn't expect the ball was coming his way because I think he had burden on the post or something like that. And the safety was able to make up that ground to get the interception. I do want to talk about this because we mentioned it before. DJ Moore's lack of effort and costly plays has definitely impacted Chicago. I don't see him as a Bear next year, personally, but I do want to mention, why is he a $20 million receiver who gives up on routes? Like, this is a playoff game. You can't do that. I don't believe the snow impacted his route or made him not able to get to that ball. I just don't believe that.
We mentioned the same thing with people like Justin Jefferson, who's definitely more than a $20 million receiver. But I think it's a combination of a couple things. One, I think he's just sick of kind of taking a backdoor seat now with Roma Dunze coming into his own. And obviously last year they had Keenan Allen. But I think it is a combination of that and then also the throws that Caleb Williams is trying to do, like running back 20 yards, back foot, or like these sidearm baseball shortstop type throws. I think he's just getting irritated with it, and he has to say that there's miscommunication both with Caleb Williams and DJ Moore. And the episode that we said that DJ Moore went missing, he was not even really targeted at all. So I think there's, with the number of targets that he's getting now, is very concerning, because I know both of you and I were talking about how DJ Moore is not really involved in this game. Same thing on the other side with Devontae Adams, where he wasn't really involved until the fourth quarter and overtime. But I think it's a combination of all of that. And to piggyback off of you, I don't see DJ Moore being a Bear next year. I just realistically don't see it because of all the factors. You have a young up and coming receiver in Luther Burden who stepped up as a rookie this year. You have Roma Dunze. Obviously, he was out for a couple of weeks, but he's coming into his own. And then you have two tight ends in Cole Kmet and Colson Loveland. So you really don't need a third wide receiver because you also have DeAndre Swift who can catch it out of the backfield.
I think a good debate that's going on right now is, you mentioned it, Caleb's playmaking ability, his arm. I want to ask you because I've had this debate with myself this year, and that is, was this year like the Vikings where, very fluky, magical, Caleb Williams and the Bears are getting lucky with this new head coach, feeling it up like it's the metaphor.
The honeymoon
Honeymoon,
period.
yes, that's it. Like the honeymoon period, and they just had a great year. Or do you think that Caleb Williams does have a good arm, and this is who he can become?
I think a combination of both because I saw something where realistically the Bears could have been 2-15 this year,
Yeah,
which is crazy to think that they finished the regular season what 11-4, no 13-4 or 11-6. Was it eleven
no,
and six?
it was over 11 wins, I think. Let me double check.
12-7.
12 and 7.
12 and yeah, 12-5 or no 11-6 technically. They finished 11 and
Oh, wow.
6
I thought it was actually better than
because
that.
it counts the playoffs as their record.
Gotcha.
But I think it's a combination of the fact that they have a new head coach, a great offensive mind in Ben Johnson, and Caleb Williams is the first overall pick for a reason. I know we've seen a lot of first overall busts in at least us watching football. Johnny Manziel, to name a couple. Deshaun Watson, another one.
Yeah.
But I think it is Ben Johnson putting him into a spot that he can succeed in. But the playmaking ability, a lot of those throws that he's attempting are off the mark big time. Either overthrowing, underthrowing, or completely out of reach, or they just end up as interceptions.
Yeah, I think Caleb Williams does have a good arm. I do think when Ben Johnson has a couple more years with him, he will be more efficient, more accurate. I think this year though is just unbelievably lucky. Some of these plays, like you
Yeah.
could not try to do that fourth quarter last play against the Rams. There's just no way. You couldn't try to do that again. I do think some of it is pretty lucky, but I'm not saying he's a bad quarterback and they don't deserve it. They definitely do. I definitely want to talk about this, Nick, because I think it's a critical point. I think Bears fans are actually disappointed in this loss because it was like a missed opportunity. Because as we mentioned it, the Rams offense was not playing great. And the Bears defense, Dennis Allen, I think he called a pretty good game for the most part. So to hold the
Yeah.
Rams to 17 points in regulation, that's a win. So I think this was just a missed opportunity for the Chicago Bears, and they could have gone further.
Yeah. I guess to quote Ben Johnson, LA Rams scraped with a win. They were not the better team
Yeah, I agree.
because we saw players like Jaquan Brisker, to name a couple on that defensive end, who made amazing plays. I remember constantly saying his name throughout the live stream. Oh, another sack by Brisker, or another tackle for loss by Brisker, a deflection by Brisker. You have players on the defensive end that were playing really good. And not to mention, Joe Tooney was playing out of position.
Yeah.
So I do feel like now, would I say throughout the season that the Bears were a better team than the Rams? No. Were they a better team in that game? Yes and no. There are the turnovers that they had, some of the missed fourth downs that they went for. And I do feel like, in a way, the Rams kind of squeaked out with a win And if I were a Bears fan, which I will never be a Bears fan in my life, even if I moved to Chicago, I would be disappointed too because you have all these expectations with a new head coach. You go 11 and 4 something, 11 and 6 in the regular season. You win the NFC North, which was the toughest division besides for the NFC West that you have out there. I would be disappointed if I were a Bears fan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Chicago Bears will be back next year, even better, which is unbelievably to say. They had 7 comeback wins this season. They could have easily been on the other side of that had it not been for some magical, crazy fourth quarter, second half craziness. So we'll see what
Right.
the Chicago Bears do next. But Nick, I want to talk about your team and the Detroit Lions with an interesting hire at offensive coordinator. You probably know more about him than I do or about this signing. So I will let you take it away.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned in a short a couple of days ago, the Lions fired John Morton, and I didn't even have this guy in my top three
Yeah.
in potential hires. This is a guy that they didn't even interview. They didn't even sit down and interview him. It's Drew Petzing, former Arizona Cardinals head coach. This is a guy that is almost a carbon copy of Ben Johnson. Loves the run game, loves getting tight ends involved, and loves the play action. He is a guy that, mind you, they did not have a good season offensively this year, with basically their entire roster dead. Their entire offensive roster was dead with injuries. But the last 2 years, he had a top five running offense and top six, top seven in passing. So this is a guy that I think he's a decent hire, in my opinion. I didn't like the hire at first, but if you look at the progression of a guy like Trey McBride over the past 4 years that Drew Petzing was an offensive coordinator, he was just going up every single season. And he's a guy that loves the run game, so he's going to get Jameer Gibbs involved, loves the play action, and knows how to build an offense. And they say he's almost a carbon copy of Ben Johnson. But I do want to point out the fact that I said that I wanted Mike McDaniel. And this is what really irritated me. Dan Campbell said, I want Mike McDaniel. The Lions front office, Sheila Ford Hamp and Brad Holmes, both said, we don't want to go that route because he might be a head coach next year. Like after he runs with the Lions offense. So they're going the cheaper route instead of getting a guy like Mike McDaniel, who's probably the best offensive mind minus Ben Johnson that you have in the NFL, to potentially go for a Super Bowl this year, win a Super Bowl this year, meaning 2026, 2027. And you go the cheaper route with a guy that you didn't even interview. That's where my irritation comes in with this because I said last episode that if Brad Holmes does not make the necessary changes that he needs to do, the window is officially closed. And I think this is slowly closing the window because we don't know what's going to happen with Calvin Shepard. He's now interviewed with Miami twice for their head coaching job. So we don't know what's going to happen. There's potential him going to LSU to be a defensive coordinator, leaving the NFL. So there's a lot of question marks in terms of the coordinators. It's the same thing that happened last year. But I like the hire and I don't like the hire. In terms of the person, I like it. The way that we did it, I don't like it.
Yeah. It was a very quick decision. I was very surprised by that. I do know not who he is, but I know his offense can be a little stagnant because when the Packers did play the Cardinals this past year, it seemed he made no adjustments, and I don't know if that'll be problematic for the Lions next year with him or not. But he does do some really good stuff, like you said, with the tight ends. He does like to get that involved. Now, the other thing is with the rushing ability, there needs to be a good offensive line. And the Lions' offensive
Yes.
line has had their problems, but I do think they are still a good core group. I'm very interested to see what happens next year if he will make a big impact, maybe be, like you said, a Ben Johnson type of guy. Because the Cardinals were record, they were terrible, but offensively, they were not that bad. They lost some really close games.
They yeah, they weren't that bad, but they also had 95% of their offense injured.
Yeah, injuries never help. Drew Petzing's a very interesting guy. I don't know much about him personally. I'm going to read more and find out more about him, about this hire for the Detroit Lions, because it was a very quick hire.
Yeah, and I am hearing that there's going to be one or two things that happen with both Taylor Decker and Graham Glasgow. So one of them is that both of them retire, and the other one is that they both get cut to free up well over $30 million in cap space.
That would definitely be helpful for the Detroit Lions as their $1 billion team. Moving on to another coach in the NFC North who departed, and that is Jeff Hafley, the defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. And this didn't surprise me when he was getting those head coaching interviews, but I do think it was quick to say he got hired pretty quickly as well. 2-year tenure with the Green Bay Packers. He did turn the Packers defense into, I would say, an elite defense this year. He did some great things, great schemes, and this is a big loss because Jeff Hafley, I did like him. I liked what he did with the defensive line, the linebackers, had some great concepts, but there's a lot of names right now floating around with head coaches being fired and other coordinators being fired. So it'll be interesting who the Packers can replace him with. I think the names right now that are floating around are Raheem Morris. He's been a name tied to Matt LaFleur and McVay tree. Back, I think LaFleur and Raheem Morris worked in Atlanta and Washington, I believe, at
Yep.
some point in their careers. And Christian Parker, a DB coach from the Eagles. I know he also had some ties with Matt LaFleur. So it'll be interesting to see who they replace him with. This is a big hole. Too, Green Bay, I think, is a pretty intriguing job because you have Micah Parsons. I think Rashawn Gary will be gone, but you do have some key
Mhm.
pieces. Evan Williams at safety. I don't know if Quay Walker will be here, but Adrian Cooper, he's a dog at linebacker. You do have these pieces that you can do a lot with. So I'm intrigued to see who they bring in to replace Jeff Hafley.
Yeah, and I agree with the Raheem Morris. He was on my list in terms of new Packers DCs. But another couple ones that you didn't mention that I think would be pretty interesting. One is more of a comedic relief for me. One of them being Jesse Minter, the former Chargers defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
I think he would be a good fit. He's a guy that turned that Chargers defense around. They were very statistically really good this season. Another one being Jim Schwartz. He is an NFC North guy, former Lions head coach, and he was the former Browns defensive coordinator. And I think that's not really my comedic relief, but I do think that he is a guy that's decently defensive minded. Now, my one for comedic relief, that being Matt Eberflus,
Oh man.
former Bears head coach and former
Oh
Cowboys
man.
defensive coordinator. I did see a Reddit post that said, wouldn't it be nice to have Matt LaFleur as the head coach and Matt Eberflus as defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers? And I just started laughing. I was like, I have to bring this up in the podcast. But I do agree with the Raheem Morris, and also Christian Parker is another one that I did see floating around. But I mentioned Jesse Minter, Jim Schwartz, as well as Matt Eberflus just for the comedy aspect of it. But like you said, it'd be very interesting to see what the Packers do in terms of their defensive coordinator position and potentially offensive coordinator, as we mentioned a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I hope there's news next week for next week's podcast. With that being said, Sam Darnold, is he going to the Super Bowl? This would be absolutely crazy as he's one game away from going to the Super Bowl and the Minnesota Vikings didn't resign him.
I'm going to say a couple of things about that. One, I think the Seahawks offense proved that they are pretty much unstoppable right now. I do see the Seahawks going to the Super Bowl, especially at how lackluster the Rams offense was this past week. And it is very interesting because we mentioned at the beginning of this season that Sam Darnold not re signing and going to Seattle, where he has players like Cooper Kupp and JSN and Kenneth Walker. Those names stand out, with Kenneth Walker scoring 3 touchdowns last week and well over 175 yards in total scrimmage yards. And it's very interesting because we've seen this in the past with the Vikings organization. We saw it with many different people. We saw it with Randy Moss at one point, where he ended up going to the Patriots after a little stint with the Raiders, mind you. But and he ended up winning multiple Super Bowls. And we see this over and over again, where now who knows what's going to happen with players like Jordan Addison after what's been coming out with him, what's going to happen with his contract with, I think it was a trespassing charge that he had. And it's interesting to see because now on top of that, you have a quarterback that you didn't re-sign because you wanted to stick with JJ McCarthy. And who knows if JJ McCarthy is going to be a Viking next year. And then on top of that, you have to figure out what's happening with someone like Brian Flores.
It's chaotic over in Minnesota. And I just want to mention this really quick on Sam Darnold. This is an interesting game because even though it is in Seattle, and I do think last game against the Niners was just an absolute showing of how good the Seattle team is, Sam Darnold against the Rams, he has a total of 6 interceptions. I know 4 in one game, 2 in another, but his QB rating isn't that great against the Rams. And despite him putting up the touchdowns and the yardage, he struggles. So I hope the home field advantage does give him an edge, but I still do see the Seahawks winning. But like you said, the organization and the front office, this does not look good right now.
Especially if he goes on to win the Super Bowl.
That'd be hilarious.
Because we see on the other end with the AFC a carbon copy of 2016, mind you, which was a decade ago, with the Patriots with a quarterback that is second in MVP voting, and Denver with a backup quarterback because at the time, Peyton Manning was the backup quarterback.
Absolutely absurd
And
what
it is,
happened.
and it's the exact same seeds beating each other to lead to this game between the Patriots and the Broncos on the other side.
It's unfortunate for Denver. I cannot believe Bo Nix broke his ankle and has suffered an season-ending injury that is just horrific and horrendous. And Jared Stidham, I wish him the best of luck. That is a tough situation to be in. The Patriots have had the
He's a guy that went from playing recreational flag football 2 months ago and is now playing in the AFC Championship
think
game.
about this. The Patriots have had the easiest schedule in the NFL. Their path to the Super Bowl is the Chargers, who don't have an offensive line, Thins struggling on offense. Now the Broncos without a quarterback. What an easy run to the Super Bowl.
Right.
To be fair, Drake May was questioned because they did play easy teams. Can he perform in playoff games? That he can. I do think he's a solid quarterback, but I do want to see
Playoff
more.
games.
Yeah,
Really playoff
I
games.
definitely do want to see more out of him next season. But this will be an interesting path to see if the Broncos can be competitive, and if the Seahawks and Sam Darnold can definitely win.
Now, I do want to ask you something as we wrap up this episode. Do we see a potential Super Bowl where we maybe have another comeback involving the Patriots? That'd be interesting to see.
Come back as in
Another stint at the 28-3.
oh no, I don't see that happening. I think it'll be blow for blow, Seahawks and Patriots. They'll take jabs at each other. I think it'll be a great Super Bowl matchup, personally.
Now, this will be for a later episode, but who do we see winning Super Bowl MVP?
Yeah, great question. I hope it's Sam Darnold. I was always a Sam Darnold hater, but now I'm just a Sam Darnold bandwagon because I just want to see him go on and win the Super Bowl because the Minnesota Vikings organization is so bad. They make poor decisions. That would be comedic. For next week's episode, I hope there's news, more head coaching in this head coaching fiesta. I hope there's no more news for the Green Bay Packers and the rest of the NFC North as to what they're going to do, and maybe Brian Flores goes somewhere. Wherever you guys find podcasts, we are there. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, every episode is uploaded on Thursday.
Good.